What if I told you that the story of One Piece could have been completely different? Like, really different? Like an alternate timeline where everything you know. Zoro tied to a post, Nami scamming pirates, Usopp lying more than a politician during election season, and Sanji drop-kicking evil fish just never happened. All because way back in episode 1, Shanks decided to do one tiny little thing. Let Luffy join his crew. That's right. Picture the scene. The 7-year-old brat, face all covered in dirt, jumping in front of Shanks yelling, "Take me with you!" And instead of laughing and saying, "You're just a kid," the red-haired guy smirks and goes, "All right, hop on." Boom! Done. The timeline we know ends right there. Ring the bell of madness, because what comes next is One Piece in full random mode. Right off the bat, the East Blue Saga, the gateway into the world of One Piece, goes straight down the drain, like completely. Those first classic arcs, Romance Dawn, Orange Town, Syrup Village, Haradi, Arlong Park, Logue Town, forget all of it. Toss the script in the fire. Luffy doesn't set out alone, doesn't sail off in his patched up little boat, bumping into Marines and bandits. He doesn't have to travel from village to village, collecting friends like World Cup stickers. None of that. He's already on a real ship, with a real crew, led by none other than Shanks, the most stylish redhead on the 7 seas. And he's not just some kid who ate a devil fruit and dreams of being king of the pirates. He's Mini Shanks, the red-haired apprentice, the official mascot of the red-haired pirates. You know what that means? It means he never meets Zoro, the most badass swordsman in the anime, the guy who sleeps more than he works and gets lost even inside his own house, just never shows up. Luffy doesn't reach Shell's Town, doesn't see Zoro tied up like a tamale to a post, doesn't have that emotional talk about promises, swords, and walking sushi. Zoro probably keeps wandering around, soloing bandits, hunting random swordsmen, and being chased by the Marines without ever crossing paths with Luffy. Without the Straw Hat's invitation, he might never step into the world of big league pirates. Or maybe he does, but in a totally different way. Who knows? And Nami? Oh, Nami, the most charismatic thief of East Blue, who stole pirate maps to free her village from Arlong. Without Luffy passing through Orange Town and Syrup Village, she never meets our protagonist. No scene of her stealing the Going Merry, no I hate pirates turning into I trust you. Her fight against Arlong could still happen. She'd probably still try to save her village. But Luffy isn't there to smash the fishman's nose, which means Arlong's downfall takes way longer, if it even happens. And Nami's trauma lingers, because anime's most satisfying punch never lands. And Usopp, poor guy, the kid who talks more than he lives, who dreams of being a brave warrior of the sea, probably keeps hanging around his village for ages, spinning tall tales for kids. Without Luffy and Zoro crashing into his town, there's no Kuro attack being stopped, no epic redemption, and definitely no real pirate ship to sail on. He'd just stay there, maybe someday working up the courage to leave, maybe not. Without Luffy's influence, Usopp never becomes the god Usopp we know, at least not in the same way. And Sanji, the most flirtatious cook alive, who fights with his legs and his heart, doesn't even dream of leaving Barity. Without a starving Luffy barging into the restaurant and brawling with Don Krieg, Sanji probably stays there for years, serving soup and taking scoldings from Zeph, until one day, who knows, he decides to leave on his own. But again, that'd be a totally different story. No Luffy showing up with that, "I came to get you because the all blue is real." Sanji's dream stays stuck in the kitchen, hidden behind a wood-burning stove. And the cherry on top, Logue Town, the place where Roger was executed, where Luffy stared death in the face and grinned like a madman as the blade nearly fell. That iconic moment just doesn't exist in this timeline. Luffy doesn't get there as a rookie facing Smoker and defying fate. He doesn't get the chance to scream to the world that he'll be king of the pirates, doesn't openly challenge the Navy, no divine sword dropping from the sky to save him, none of it, because he's not chasing his dream alone. He's living inside someone else's, Shanks. And here's the real twist. Without this solo journey, Luffy never challenges the world as an independent captain. He grows up in the shadow, or rather, the spotlight of his idol. He doesn't make the calls of a leader, doesn't learn how to gather people through sheer charisma, doesn't beat his chest saying, "Trust me, it'll work." He's part of Shanks' crew, an apprentice, a little brother figure, maybe even the future heir of the red-haired pirates. But he's not the leader. And that changes absolutely everything. Because let's be real, what made Luffy wasn't just his strong punch or goofy laugh. It was the fact that even without knowing a thing about navigation, strategy, or pirate politics, he won people over with his willpower. One by one, the Straw Hats joined him because they believed in the craziness of that kid who wanted to be king of the pirates. They were all broken people, full of trauma, who saw hope in Luffy, a chance to start over. And that doesn't exist in this reality. Without that journey, the original Straw Hat crew never forms. The most chaotic, lovable bunch on the Grand Line simply doesn't exist. No monster trio, no Chopper shouting Dokuta, no Robin whispering forbidden history. Frankie never builds the Thousand Sunny, Brook never sings Bink's sake, and Jinbe never becomes the trusted helmsman. The story takes a hard left turn, and not in a good way. Sure, Luffy could still grow, still get stronger. In fact, maybe even stronger than in the original timeline, since he's surrounded by veteran pirates from such a young age. But he'd be someone else. Maybe more serious, maybe more tactical, maybe more like Shanks himself. But he wouldn't be the Luffy who jumps off a cliff trusting someone will stretch out a hand to catch him. He'd be the Luffy who calculates the wind before jumping, maybe even a little too well behaved. And to think it all comes down to one tiny choice. Just one, get on the ship, kid. But that decision changes everything. It's a giant domino toppling over the whole story. And now that we've destroyed the East Blue Saga with one simple what if, just imagine what happens when Luffy grows up alongside the red-haired pirates, facing challenges he never would have seen so early. What kind of trouble would he witness? Who would his rivals be? And would he ever step out of Shanks' shadow to form his own crew from scratch in the new world? And let's be honest, after giving that unexpected yes and putting Mini Luffy on the red-haired pirate's ship, Shanks basically signed the contract for the biggest turning point in One Piece history. Forget East Blue. Forget the patched-up little boat. Forget Luffy fishing with his mouth. Now, he's aboard one of the most respected and dangerous men's ships in the world. A 7-year-old kid running across the deck in the middle of a tough-as-nails crew, whose basic rule is probably, if you don't drink, you don't live. And there's Luffy, right in the middle of it all, holding a mug of juice while Lucky Roo launches a hunk of meat into the stratosphere, and Ben Beckman puts out a cigarette while casually philosophizing about pirate international politics. But unlike normal kids who learn to read and write in school, Luffy's lessons are how to punch out bandits, dodge admirals, chart illegal routes, negotiate with dangerous kingdoms, and most importantly, how to be a real pirate. He grows up there as a kind of mascot, apprentice, Shanks' unofficial adopted son. And even though he's still Luffy, goofy, impulsive, hungry, and stubborn, being surrounded by a mature crew shapes him differently. Instead of developing leadership from the start, he grows up watching Shanks lead. He learns that sometimes it's better to smile and raise a drink than blow up a ship, that a good captain knows when to strike and when to dance. Luffy learns the ways of the sea as a kid born to sail. But there's a price. Instead of the wildly spontaneous Luffy, who bonds emotionally with anyone who stumbles into his life, we get a Luffy shaped by the Shanks school of piracy. A loyal guy with a code of honor, but less impulsive, maybe even more tactical. And let's be real, a Luffy who plans things? That's bizarre, but in this alternate timeline, it's possible. After all, who could grow up at Ben Beckman's side? The man who intimidates admirals with a rifle and not come out at least a little more level-headed. And while Luffy gets stronger, more skilled, and more famous as Shanks Kid, the world keeps turning. The Grand Line is still burning. The Marines are still scheming. The other Yonkos are still glaring at each other, waiting to see who sneezes first. And in the middle of all this, there's a certain organization called Baroque Works, run by a former warlord named Crocodile, quietly manipulating a rebellion in the kingdom of Alabasta. Now, hold tight, because this is where Luffy's absence snowballs into massive consequences. In the original story, Luffy and the Straw Hats reach Alabasta after a string of adventures, saving Vivi, fighting Mr. 3, escaping Mr. 2's trap, and Luffy taking a brutal beating from Crocodile, only to come back and land the legendary punch to the face of villain arrogance. But in this alternate reality, Luffy never even meets Vivi. He never sets foot in Whiskey Peak or Little Garden, which means Vivi never boards a friendly ship. She never finds allies to help stop the Civil War, threatening to tear her kingdom apart. In other words, Alabasta stands alone. And Robin? She'd probably only ever be rescued by the revolutionaries, which means Water 7 and Enies Lobby, they never happen. Now grab your chair, or better yet, your hat, because we're arriving at one of the most brutal moments of this ride. Marineford, the war, the chaos, the all-out clash that changed the One Piece world forever. And yes, even in this alternate timeline where Luffy grew up alongside Shanks, this moment still comes, but in a completely different way. If you thought the story was wild up until now, this is the point where it kicks the emotional door open and drops your heart on the floor. Because here are the facts. Ace, Luffy's sworn brother, still exists. He's still Roger's son. He still carves his own path. And he still gets tangled up with Blackbeard, who hands him over to the Marines to try and become a warlord. So yeah, Ace still ends up captured, sentenced to execution, and becomes the spark that ignites the greatest war in the world. The difference is, where's Luffy in all of this? Well, in this timeline, our Straw Hat isn't an independent captain leading the craziest crew on the seas. He's the Luffy who grew up in Shanks' crew. A Luffy trained by Ben Beckman, probably already wielding haki with a sharper, more serious outlook, but without that insane recklessness that drove him to storm, impel down alone, and walk out with what looked like the pirate world's Tinder lineup of the most wanted criminals alive. Which means this Luffy isn't charging out of hell to save Ace. He's coming from Shanks' side. More guarded, more strategically positioned, maybe even against his will. Because let's face it, Shanks is a man of foresight, and he would have tried to keep Luffy out of this madness. But here's the problem. This is still Luffy. He may have grown differently, but his blood boils the same when Ace is in danger. He's the brother, the one who swore to protect. And even with Shanks trying to hold him back, it's impossible to picture this Luffy just sitting on the sidelines, eating barbecue and saying, "Wow, what a shame, huh?" So, what happens? Picture the scene. The war is raging. Whitebeard smashing everything. The Marines panicking. Admirals firing lasers everywhere. And suddenly, boom! The music stops. The sky darkens. The Marines freeze in place. Mihawk's sword nearly slips from his hand. Because here he comes, Shanks, the red-haired, with that slow stride, the presence of 1,000 lions and eyes that say, "Hit one more person and I'll break you." And right beside him, Luffy, now a young pirate with a hardened gaze, haki in his fists, and a straw hat that's no longer just a hand-me-down, but the symbol of a new era. But here's the catch. This Luffy isn't Marineford's protagonist. He's not there screaming Ace in the middle of the battlefield, stumbling, crying, and getting beaten half to death. He's a heavy co-star. Shanks' apprentice, a present ally, a young man burning to help but surrounded by titans. And here's the cruelest part of this timeline. He doesn't get the same spotlight. Luffy doesn't break into Impel Down. He doesn't free Buggy, Mr. 2, Crocodile, and Jinbe. He doesn't gather that insane strike force that, in the original timeline, carved a path through the Marine's chest. He's there with Shanks, who only shows up at the end of the war, which means by the time they arrive, it's already too late. Ace is gone. The scene is brutal. Luffy, even more mature, feels every bit of it. He sees his brother fall into Whitebeard's arms. He sees the blade pierce his chest. He sees the light leave the eyes of the person he admired most. And he feels that cruel helplessness of being there. Strong, trained, but too late to save the one who mattered. And if this shattered the impulsive, dreamy Luffy of the original line, just imagine what it does to this Luffy. What it does to a kid who grew up among giants, trained to be rational, but who deep down is still the boy who only wanted to protect his brother. This is the heaviest emotional turning point of this reality, because this is the moment Luffy changes. The war is already over. Shanks managed to stop more bloodshed. The Marines retreat. Whitebeard is dead. The world is in shock. But Luffy just stands there, staring at the sky, feeling the weight of not having done anything. And in that instant, his dream stops being just something beautiful and becomes a real mission. A mission with purpose. It's no longer, I want to be king of the pirates because it's cool. Now it's, I want to be strong enough to never lose someone I love again. That's when Luffy's true training with Shanks begins. We reach the part where the sea stops being calm and turns into a literal battlefield with skyscraper-sized waves, creatures straight out of horror movies, and pirates so dangerous that just hearing their names gives you stomach cramps. Yes, we're talking about it, the New World. But hold on, because in this universe where Shanks took Luffy into his crew, since episode 1, this saga starts way earlier. And with Luffy on a whole different level. No 2-year time skip, no training with an old blind man in a monster-filled island. This Luffy grew up in chaos, trained by Ben Beckman, lectured by Lucky Roo between bites of meat, learned to shoot from Yasop even if he missed every single shot, and was drilled in haki almost before he could write. The guy was raised by the best, sailing through dangerous islands, watching the Grand Line up close, which means when this Luffy steps into the New World, he's not learning, he's executing. But there's a catch, because growing up under Shanks' wing, he's not the free, wild captain yelling, "Let's go save some random people and then punch the government." He's more restrained, at least for now. He understands strategy, he understands alliances, and maybe, just maybe, he even follows orders once in a while. Picture this. Shanks, worried about certain pirate movements in the New World, calls Luffy and says, "There's a guy named Doflamingo, former warlord, cruel, manipulative, playing God in Dressrosa. Go take a look. If you can, shut the show down." And Luffy, now older, serious, with observation haki running on 5G, answers, "Am I supposed to smash everything or just investigate?" So yes, Dressrosa still happens in this timeline, but not the original way. No Luffy bumping into fairies, Tontadas telling stories, Law dragging out a 3-episode tragic flashback. Here, Luffy arrives with a mission. He steps onto the island like a special agent, an unofficial emissary of the red-haired pirates. Not officially, of course, because Shanks would never admit it to the press. But behind the scenes, things are burning. Doflamingo is scheming, manipulating, selling weapons to the underworld, dealing with matters way bigger than just gladiators and magic toys. And Luffy is there not only to protect people, but to stop a much bigger war. But let's be real, Luffy is still Luffy. Even more mature, more strategic, he's still the guy who sees injustice and says, I don't care if it's the mission or not. This is wrong, and I'm gonna punch it. So when he sees what's happening in Dressrosa, the manipulation of the people, the kids turned into toys, the general suffering, it's over. Secret mission goes down the drain, and Luffy switches to emotional destruction mode. Doflamingo, you pink sunglasses clown, get ready to take a hockey beating. Now imagine Luffy facing Doflamingo with years of experience at Shanks' side. He doesn't show up clueless about hockey, taking beatings and improvising with sheer willpower. Here, he's already mastered armament and observation hockey, maybe even showing signs of advanced conquerors. Things get serious. And remember, in the original timeline, Luffy only wins with massive help. Law's plan, Zoro holding off Pika, Usopp pulling off sniper miracles, the Colosseum crowd rallying as allies. But in this reality, none of that is guaranteed, because the original Straw Hat crew never existed. So who's with Luffy? Maybe new companions he picked up over the years, people he met during missions with Shanks, or allies he made after Marineford. But it's also possible he's acting alone, a lone wolf, like Rubber John Wick, a pirate carrying a bigger banner, but driven by his own will. Either way, Doflamingo feels the hit. Because this Luffy isn't here to play, the fight is brutal, intense, maybe even quicker, since Luffy already shows up with hockey on another level. Maybe Law's still in the mix, and the two team up. But here, instead of being an improvised alliance, it's practically a top-level covert op. Two young pirates with powerful names behind them, cleaning up the New World's mess before it explodes like a time bomb. Now, think about the impact this has on the world. Newspapers blowing up with headlines. Dressrosa freed by mysterious pirate linked to red hair. Doflamingo defeated. World government on high alert. Who is Shanks' heir without a crew, but strong enough to crush an empire? The world starts realizing that a new player is on the move. A name carrying the hat of the past, the training of the present, and a future nobody can predict. Monkey D. Luffy. But the question is, does this Luffy want to be the king of the pirates? Because up until now, everything he's done has been under orders, advice, or indirect missions. He helped because it was the right thing, because his blood wouldn't let him ignore it. But what about the dream? Does he still want the One Piece? Does he still want to form his own crew? Or is this Luffy going to walk a completely new path, a liberator of kingdoms, a vigilante of the seas, an anti-hero with the soul of a hero? The gates of the New World are wide open now. Luffy has already made his name in Dressrosa. He has already seen Marineford. He has already lost Ace. He has already trained with legends. The world is watching, and the big names, Kaido, Big Mom, Blackbeard, are starting to pay attention. Now is the moment when our parallel theory heads toward its finale. And we're not talking about just any small island. We're talking about Wano and Egghead, decisive arcs full of twists, clashes of titans, and, of course, mind-blowing revelations. But the question of the day is, how would all this play out if Luffy had been taken in by Shanks since episode 1? Spoiler, it would be epic and completely different. First, let's open the gates to the land of Wano, the land of samurai, cursed swords, scalding hot baths, and Kaido drinking himself into oblivion every day like it's carnival weekend. In the original universe, Luffy arrives there as one of the catalysts of the revolution, a pirate from the outside with crazy alliances who slowly unites the samurai, the red scabbards, the alliance with Law, Kid, and the others, and basically starts breaking down Kaido's rule with charisma, brute force, and punches to oppression's face. But in our alternate universe, Luffy doesn't have a crew, he doesn't have Law as an immediate ally, he doesn't have Zoro getting lost in 27 castle hallways. So how does he enter Wano? Simple. He enters as part of a giant alliance. Think about it. Shanks already had an interest in maintaining balance in the New World. Kaido, on the other hand, was threatening everything, teaming up with Big Mom, manufacturing weapons, and preparing to blow up the world's geopolitics. So Shanks, the master of pirate diplomacy and the I show up at the end to settle things approach, sees that this time, the situation is too dire to ignore. And who does he send as the representative of his flag? His right hand in the making, the kid with hockey, determination, and that rubber punch no one understands until they take it. He sends Luffy, and not just any Luffy. The Luffy who already went through Marineford, who already fought Doflamingo in Dressrosa, who learned from the best since childhood. It's like sending a missile with a smile. But here, he arrives in Wano with context. He's not just some random pirate trying to sneak in. He's the messenger of a real real alliance. The Red Scabbards, they respect him. The Samurai, they recognize his strength. Momonosuke sees him as a protector. Even Yamato, who in the original timeline falls in love with the idea of Luffy being Joy Boy, here sees someone who already carries the legacy of one of the greatest pirates in history. Picture the setting. The land of Wano, with its breathtaking landscapes, the sound of flutes echoing in the wind, and the looming danger of Kaido stomping around. Our Luffy has already arrived in full force, with that mix of secret agent and powerful alliance enforcer vibe. But still missing that spark, you know? That pow moment that changes everything. And then, during the clash against Kaido and his forces, the pressure rises, the battle gets serious, and our Luffy's heart beats louder than a war drum. It's not just a punch anymore. It's the awakening of the Devil Fruit, that special power only a true warrior can unleash. The ability to expand his power into the environment, controlling not just his body, but even the world around him. In the original universe, this awakening of the Gomu Gomu no Mi happens way later in the saga, but here, in Wano, man, it would be the perfect timing. Imagine Luffy pushed to his limit against Kaido or one of his monstrous commanders, when suddenly, in a burst of emotion, rage, and sheer will, his body starts reacting in ways never seen before. His rubber doesn't just stretch, it blends with the environment, creating shockwaves, fluid movements, and even that controlled chaos effect that gives everyone chills. And the best part, since he trained with Ben Beckman and Yasop, he has tactical awareness to use this awakening, not just go around punching blindly. He basically becomes a master of the Gomu Gomu, giving him a massive upgrade in the battles against Kaido, making the fight more balanced, explosive, and full of clever moves. And of course, all of this still with that clumsy, dude, what's happening? Vibe only Luffy has, but with more control and focus. This awakening also grabs the attention of allies, who realize Shanks' kid isn't just promise, he's the real deal, a pirate who can truly challenge the emperors of the sea. With this new power, the alliance against Kaido grows stronger, and the narrative becomes much more tense and epic. The final battle in Wano isn't just a physical confrontation. It's the moment when a new Luffy is born. No longer the innocent kid who set out in search of adventure, but the man who carries the future of the new world. And it's this Luffy, with renewed power, who heads to Egghead ready to face the scientific mysteries and new dangers awaiting him. Yes, that place where Vegapunk cosplays as Albert Einstein and builds robots that would make even Frankie drool. The place where science meets the secret of the Void Century. And in this alternate reality, Luffy goes there, but not as some curious intruder. He goes with intent, informed, maybe even invited. Because think about it, this Luffy is getting closer and closer to the truths of the world. He has already seen the Navy's corruption, the world government's control, the impact of the ancient weapons. And Vegapunk, he's the guy holding the missing pieces of the puzzle. The most brilliant scientist in the world, who knows too much and wants to escape before the government silences him. Luffy might go to Egghead as part of a mission from Shanks, or even on his own, following the trail of clues he picked up from Dressrosa, Wano, and other liberated kingdoms. The motivation here isn't, I'll meet a crazy scientist. The motivation is, I need to understand the world I want to change. And yes, the clash with the Seraphim can still happen. Yes, the arrival of the Navy, CP0, and the alternate Vegapunks can still blow up in the same way. But this time, Luffy is ready. He's not improvising. He came with purpose. Maybe in this version, Luffy becomes the mediator between Vegapunk and Shanks. Maybe he's the link that connects the science of the past with the will of the future. And more, maybe here, he starts to realize that Joy Boy isn't just a legend, but a title, a responsibility. And who knows? Maybe he is the next one. Yes, because even with all these differences, even without living the arcs the original way, this Luffy still has the heart of Luffy. The flame of freedom, the laugh that defies the world, the ability to unite different people with a simple phrase and a crooked smile. And deep down, destiny will do what it does best. Push this kid toward the throne of the greatest of them all. But hold on, because there's more. The final war is coming. The world is collapsing. The world government can no longer hide the secrets. The D are on the move. And Shanks? What is he plotting? Because Luffy, our alternate protagonist, still has one question left to answer. Whose legacy does he truly carry? Shanks or Roger's own? And that answer, my friend, could change everything.